Tales of the Old Stoic. Chapter 4. The Way of Iron. The mountain did not move for men. It was the men who learned to move for the mountain. At first light, the peaks were blue stone under a pale fire, and the wind walked the ridges like an old friend returning to a house it once built. A narrow path clung to the slope. Below, the valley still slept. Fields folded like blankets. A thin silver river, the roofs of a distant city gathering dawn, the way hands gather water. There, on a ledge no wider than a cart's axle, a young warrior stood barefoot with a blade in his hand. His name is lost now, like most names, but the shape of him remains. Shoulders lined by effort, breath arranged in pairs, eyes learning the slow kindness of focus. He had come when the olive trees were first in bloom, and he had stayed until the cicadas grew old singing. He had learned the mountain's grammar, how rock teaches by refusing to explain. His master watched from a little distance, a staff across his knees, cloak drawn tight, though the sun would soon be warm. The old man's face was the color of maps and seasons, not years. When the boy struck well, the master only said, "Again." When the boy faltered, he said the same, "Again." There were no medals in this place, no songs, no witnesses, no grand speeches. There was only repetition, the river that wears a canyon into stone, the breath that makes a life out of hours. The warrior moved through his forms, cut, turn, step, breathe. The blade did not sing, it listened. The air did not part, it waited. Sweat drew a script down his ribs. His soles learned to trust the stone as if it were a teacher who had once been stern and was now merely honest. "Again," said the master, as the first rim of the sun cleared the far ridge. The boy set his feet and struck. Again. He struck until his shoulders trembled. Again. He struck until his thoughts had the good manners to be quiet. Again. He lowered the blade at last and stood with his eyes closed, shoulders heaving. The wind came and went across his skin as if counting his patience. "Master," he said without opening his eyes, "how will I know I am ready?" "You will not," the old man replied. "You will know only that you are still working." The boy opened his eyes and met that answer like a wave meets a rock. "Then what is the end of all this?" "The end?" the master said, amused. "There is no end. There is only the moment when the work has become you." They ate in silence. Olives, a heel of bread, water so cold it startled the tongue. After, the master took up a small bronze mirror and set it on a flat stone. It caught the daylight and threw a coin of sun under the boy's bare forearm. "Hold your blade without thinking," he said. The warrior raised the sword. The circle of light trembled on his skin, then steadied. "What do you see?" the master asked. "My reflection," the boy said, half smiling at the trick. "Do not be fooled," the old man said. "You are not looking at yourself. You are looking at what the light is willing to tell you about yourself. Most men live only by reflections, praise, blame, rumor. Let such things pass over you as this light does, bright, warm, then gone. The steel that trusts reflections shatters." The boy listened in the way work teaches listening, without opinion. They rose and walked a higher path. The pines leaned from the cliff like listeners straining to hear a better story. The master set a small ritual of training, 5 stones stacked on a stump at the ravine's edge. "Strike until the top stone flinches," he said. The boy laughed softly despite himself. "Stone does not flinch." "Nor does life," the master said. "You are not striking the stone. You are striking the part of you that still believes force is louder than attention." The warrior set his feet. He let the mountain enter his spine, the sky enter his breath, the edge enter his hands. He cut the air, not with anger, but with arrangement. The stones did not move. He cut again, turning his wrists as if turning a thought until its true face appeared. The stones remained as stones prefer to remain. A small impatience woke in him, sleek and familiar. He fed it nothing. He let it pace and grow smaller. "Again," he told himself, and the voice sounded, for the first time, not like the master's, but like his own. After an hour, a top stone did not flinch, but the boy's breath did. It softened. It fell into step with something larger than his chest. He stepped back and bowed to the work, not the result. The master's eyes warmed, which for him was a parade. They descended by a narrow goat track to a hollow where the wind could rest. There, like an altar the mountain had built for its own use, stood a flat table of slate. The master placed the blade upon it. "Sit," he said. They sat cross-legged, the sword between them like a boundary and a bridge. "When you came," the old man said, "you believed you were training to defeat men." The boy almost smiled. "Was I not?" "You were training to be undefeated by yourself," the master said. "Men are wind. Today they push, tomorrow they pass. Your only enemy is the habit that drags you where you said you would not go." The boy looked down at his hands. They were nicked and lined, a new map being drawn on the old. He remembered the first week on the mountain, the insult of thin air, the way his legs argued with his will, the child inside him who stamped and demanded glory. He remembered the night he nearly left, when the stars felt like eyes that knew him and did not approve. He remembered staying for no reason he could explain later. "Why do we call it the way of iron?" he asked. "Because iron remembers the fire that shaped it," the master said, "and because it bends before it breaks, and because it rusts if left idle. Remember these. They ate again at noon. Figs, a handful of almonds, a wedge of cheese that tasted like a field had learned to sing. Heat shimmered over distant stone. A hawk slid across the sky without touching it. In the afternoon, the master took the boy to a wind-scoured notch, where the cliff fell away, as if the world had forgotten to finish itself. "Your last lesson," he said. "Strike until the air moves." The boy nodded, already smiling at the riddle. He struck. The air was air. He struck again. The air accepted the blade the way the sea accepts an oar, politely, without interest. He struck until his shoulders burned and his breath lifted ash from old fires. He struck until fury came, quick and ashamed, and he let it pass, as one lets a fly escape a room that has a door. He struck until a movement was not movement, but prayer. At last, he stopped and closed his eyes because the world had become large enough to be seen that way. The wind ran along the ledge and through him. He felt it enter at his heel and leave at his wrist, as if he were a reed the river had decided to borrow for a song. He opened his eyes and lowered the sword. "The air moves," he said, not with triumph, but with thanks. The master did not clap. He was not a crowd. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder, a weight, a warmth, a wordless seal. "Now," he said, "you may carry a blade without needing one." They did not speak for a long time. They did not need to. The mountain had taken speech into itself and returned quiet. When the light turned honey thick and the shadows grew long enough to lie down in, a rider appeared above the pass, leading his horse more than riding it. Dust salted his cloak, and news wrote itself upon his face. He saw them and removed what little distance he could without running. "From the city," he said, bowing to the old man and then to the younger, as if practice had taught him the order and wisdom had taught him to ignore it. "Banners rise, drums gather. They say a storm that walks on feet is coming." The boy looked at the master and found him, as he always was, exactly where he stood. "What shall I do?" the young man asked. The master reached for the sword on the slate and held it out, not as a command, but as a gift returned. "Go," he said, "but go down the mountain as you came up, without hurry, without show. Remember what you have learned here, that the strike is less than the stance less than the breath less than the seeing. You have not trained to take lives. You have trained so that life does not take you." The warrior took the blade and felt it lighter than the first day he had lifted it, though its weight had never changed. He strapped on his sandals, tightened his belt, and turned to the path that slid toward fields and roofs and voices. "Master," he said, "will I be afraid?" "Yes," the old man said, as one names the weather. "Be afraid before the first step. Then walk anyway, and let fear learn your pace." The rider waited, shifting from foot to foot out of habit. The boy thanked him with a nod and began to descend. After a dozen paces, he stopped and looked back. "If the gods stand in my way," he called, "what then?" The master cupped a hand to his ear, inviting the mountain to deliver the words properly. "Make them human," he answered. "Everything becomes human when met by a human who is fully one." The boy smiled, a small private thing, and continued down. He passed the notch where he had asked the air to move and learned that it always had. He passed the stacked stones that had taught him what attention weighs. He passed the bronze mirror, now just a piece of sun sleeping on rock. He passed the ledge where his feet had first trusted stone. In each place, he left a part of himself that no longer needed to go further. By the time he reached the line where grass begins to believe it will be grass, he was breathing like a field. The city sharpened as the air thickened. Voices rose like birds startled, then settled. He crossed a brook with water clear enough to count your future in. He knelt and drank. In the surface he saw no reflection, only sky. He did not mind. He stood and walked, and the earth accepted his steps as if it had been waiting specifically for them. Behind him, the master watched until distance did what it always does to faces. He sat on the slate and closed his eyes. He had taught nothing. He had only tended a fire that was already burning and shown it where to warm and where not to burn. Night arrived with its usual grace. The first star pricked the blue. In the valley, lamps began their brief work of pretending to be suns. The rider took his leave down a goat path, humming the kind of tune men hum when they have seen something they cannot put in a letter. On the last rise before the road, the young warrior paused. He could hear the city now, not as noise, but as a kind of breathing. He set his palm lightly on the blade, not to bless it, not to promise it glory, but to remind it and himself of their agreement. "When I lift you," he said, "it will be to protect what does not need you." Then he laughed softly at the strangeness of truth and went on. He entered the outskirts where children throw sticks and call them spears, where old women bargain with life over bunches of herbs, where dogs debate philosophy with sleeping cats. He passed and left the world unchanged and somehow better. At the gate, a captain looked him over the way men look at wheat to see if a harvest will keep. He nodded once. The warrior nodded in the same language. Neither spoke. Speech would have made the moment smaller. In the square, a handful of soldiers were gathering. Drums were finding their hands. Someone was tying a banner to a pole with the seriousness of a wedding. The young man joined them without raising dust. He stood as if he had invented standing. A boy not yet old enough to have opinions about his own courage sidled up to him and asked, "Are you strong?" The warrior considered. "I am honest," he said. "Strength follows." The boy looked confused and strangely comforted, as children often are by sentences they will grow into. The drums found their pace. The banner learned to be a wind. The city lifted its chin. Somewhere beyond the hills, whatever was coming continued to come. The young man closed his eyes for the breath of a breath and felt the mountains settle into his bones like a house remembering its foundation. When he opened them, the world had not changed and was entirely new. He did not look for the gods. If they wished to stand in his way, they would have to stand in his way where he already was. He smiled, lightly, privately, as one smiles at a friend who has finally learned a joke without having it explained. And then he stepped forward, calm as dawn, iron without noise. End of Chapter 4, The Way of Iron, from the series Tales of the Old Stoic. If wisdom still whispers in your heart, stay a while and subscribe for more